Ripped.
This is Microphone Monday, in the studio with John Bailey. Welcome back to Microphone Mondays with your host, professional voice actor John Bailey. Brought to you by RippedApparel.com. One print, 24 hours, and it's gone. So I had a viewer that brought up a question and said, hey, all your voices like this sound the same. And I hear that a lot, and even including my wife. Certain people only hear voices in the same pitch as all the same. They haven't learned to be able to tell the differences between those tiny little changes in somebody's voice. It breaks down into components. Pat Fraley goes into this in detail, but it's also a lot to do with music theory. You can also learn about this at patfraley.com. And there's tempo, there's pitch, there's placement, and there's mouth work. There's all these different pieces that make up a voice. And sometimes when certain elements are the same, like placement and the pitch, you've got 2 out of maybe 5 pieces that are exactly the same. So people are like, oh, well, that voice sounds like that voice. Well, what you're hearing is you're hearing those 2 things that are similar and not the 3 other things that are different. There's a big difference between an impression and a voice match. An impression is like a caricature you get when you go to the, the carnival, and they say, hey, I'll draw a cartoon of you if you'll sit down, and they do this exaggerated picture of you that doesn't look like you, but it has your features, but it's cartoony and over the top. That's an impression. That's what stand-up comedians use, because they take certain parts of a voice, they exaggerate them to make them funny or cartoony. In voice matching, you're not supposed to be funny. You're supposed to sound exactly like the person you're voice matching for, so much so that nobody can tell the difference between you and the person that you're voice matching. I'll give you an example. Arnold Schwarzenegger's impression would sound like this. Listen to me, you gotta get to the chopper now, come on, get down. And what I'm doing is taking the certain parts of his voice and putting it in here and making exaggerated. Okay, that's an exaggeration of what he really sounds like. I actually did a voice match audition for him for Last Stand, and his real voice is, I'm on vacation. His voice is very, very normal. And you can tell a big difference between the exaggerated funny stuff and the straight, normal, has to sound just like him stuff. And it's a lot trickier than you think, because you have to play back the reference clips over and over and over again, make sure your voice is exactly the same pitch, tempo, everything. That's why it's such a difficult little area to get into, because it's not just, hey, I do great impressions. Doesn't work that way. Now, I'm going to take the 3 voices that people have gotten confused, and I'll start with the movie trailer voice, because that's the one I do the most. And I'll go into that from them Optimus Prime, and then Keith David, who is the voice of Goliath and Gargoyles. And I'll show you the tiny little, teeny tiny differences, and I'll show you the similarities. They're all in the same pitch, and they're all in the same placement. They all have the same pitch down here. This is the pitch that they're at. It's the super low bass. And they placed right around this area. But they're moved slightly just here and there. There's tiny little differences. First off, the movie trailer voice. The movie trailer voice has to be enunciated, and it has that same staccato rhythm over and over again in a world beyond imagination. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But it's placed right here, and it takes up the entire throat and sometimes the chest, depending on how you do the voice. Now, take Optimus Prime's voice, you move it over to one side, and you put it down here, and then move it over to the left. And then you go even lower and down at the end of your words. And there's even some mouth work involved. The way I change my mouth when I talk. My name is Optimus Prime. Autobots transform and roll out. Now you'll take Keith David's voice. Keith David's voice is right here, so it's in the same pitch and it's in the same place, but it's actually a little bit higher. It's not way down here. It's a little bit up here. And there's also nose work involved, because the way Keith David talks, he talks with a lot of his nose and his teeth. He has that smooth way he talks, and it's got that subtle differences, but there's a lot more up here in the nose than there is with the other 2 voices. But yeah, it's just such slight differences. You can tell how people will be like, oh, that's the same voice. So I wanted to sound like Keith David. You have to put it back in the throat, and you have to have that smooth sounding quality. I actually got to meet him in person, and I was like, every time I see a Navy commercial, I get a big smile on my face. Thank you, I appreciate that. He's got that smooth charisma. He's got that very, almost a Robert Stack kind, on the next edition of Unsolved Mysteries. He's got that little hey. So Optimus Prime got that hard edge all over to one side. Then the movie trailer voice has to be smooth, and it has to be pronunciated, and has that certain kind of rhythm in a world beyond imagination. Then you take Keith David, and you can start to hear the differences, because I'm Goliath, and 1,000 years ago, superstition and the sword ruled. It was an age of darkness. It was a time of gargoyles. And you have to keep on working. You have to listen to the reference over and over and over again. Play yours back and be like, man, is that close enough? Is that going to work? And that's how I get
those ADR jobs, I have to sound exactly like somebody. And I'm not saying that mine is perfect, because another thing people forget is that there's a little bit of every voice actor's voice in every voice that they do. So if you hear me doing Christopher Walken's voice, you're going to hear a little bit of me doing Christopher Walken's voice. But you can tell the difference between my version of Christopher Walken and, let's say, McGoiter / Brock Baker's version of Christopher Walken. Only the original can sound exactly like the original. But if you can get like 98, 97%, then you've got a good chance at getting jobs like that. Maybe you still think, they all sound the same to me. Well, oh well. At least I tried. That's it for Microphone Monday. Bye-bye.